Julian Royce didn't slump gracefully. He hit the white tablecloth like a man whose strings had been cut. One sharp inhale, a wet, useless cough, and then his face started turning the wrong colour under the chandelier light, the kind that made diamonds sparkle and made people forget they were still mortal. For half a second, the VIP room at Le Marceau stayed frozen, as if the richest people in it believed panic was beneath them, and oxygen was something money could negotiate for later. But then everything broke at once. Phones rose like a reflex, crystal clinked against crystal, chairs scraped back, and someone let out a stunned laugh that died the moment Julian's lips edged toward blue, and his eyes rolled as if his body had decided to quit without asking permission. "Is he—" a man in a tailored suit whispered while already filming, because in rooms like this a tragedy wasn't real until it was content. "Someone do something!" the restaurant manager barked, his voice cracking with fear and borrowed authority, and he snapped his fingers toward security as if they could physically hold death at the door. Two security guards stepped in front of the exits, blocking them like the room was a vault instead of a restaurant, and the message was immediate. No witnesses leaving, no story escaping, no one controlling the narrative except the people who paid for it. Harper Lane stood at the edge of the chaos with a tray in her hands and a knot in her stomach, because she'd been invisible 10 minutes ago. Just another waitress in black moving quietly through the soft gold light, collecting empty glasses from men who never looked up. And now Celeste Vale, Julian's fiancée, flawless in a dress that looked poured onto her, turned toward Harper like blame had finally found a body. "You!" Celeste snapped, loud enough for every phone mic in the room, her eyes sharp with a kind of anger that didn't come from fear for him, but from fear of how this would look.
"What did you bring him?" Harper's manager, Victor, saw an opening and grabbed it like a life raft. "Harper, what did you serve?" he demanded, eyes wide, already building a story in his head that ended with Harper fired and the restaurant protected. "Answer me, now!" Harper didn't answer, because Julian made a sound that wasn't a word. It was air trying to escape a throat that had stopped working, and the sound cut through the luxury like a blade. Harper dropped the tray, glass exploding across the floor, and nobody cared because money never taught anyone what mattered when a heart started bargaining with silence. She pushed through the crowd and said, "Move!" Not yelling, not pleading, just flat, because there wasn't room for politeness anymore. A guest in a silk blouse tried to step in front of her, and Harper clipped past without apology. And when Victor grabbed her arm and hissed, "You can't touch him, liability," Harper twisted free like her body remembered stronger hands and tighter rooms. "Liability is him dying," she said, and she didn't wait for permission that would never come. She dropped to her knees beside Julian, close enough to smell expensive cologne and aged wine and truffle butter, and then she caught something else that didn't belong in a dining room built for comfort. A faint, sharp bitterness near the rim of his drink, like a warning that refused to be polite. Celeste's voice softened instantly for the cameras. "Julian, baby, look at me," she said, performing devotion with perfect timing, but Harper ignored her and slid 2 fingers under Julian's jaw to tilt his head back and check his mouth. No obstruction, no food lodged. His throat moved once, struggling, and Harper felt the cold edge of truth. He wasn't choking on steak, he was choking on air. "Call 911, Harper said, and Victor flinched as if the words were profanity. "We have an in-house," he started, and Harper cut him off without raising her volume. "Call now." The tone did it. Victor's mouth opened and the word "yes" fell out before his pride could catch it. A guard leaned in, hand hovering near Harper's shoulder. "Ma'am, step away." Harper didn't look up. "If you pull me off him, he stops breathing," she said, and she let that hang long enough to force the guard into a decision he didn't want on his conscience. She placed her fingers on Julian's neck and found a pulse that was weak, irregular, slipping. And she forced herself to stay calm because panic spread faster than poison. "Get him on the floor," she told the closest man who wasn't filming, and when he hesitated and glanced towards Celeste for permission like money controlled gravity,
Harper's voice sharpened just enough to cut through him. Do it or back up. The man moved, and Julian was lowered to the carpet. Harper positioned him, tilted his chin, watched his chest rise once, and then stop. Someone nearby whispered, "Start compressions," like they were asking whether it was socially acceptable to try. Harper's hands found the center of his chest like memory, elbows locked, shoulders stacked, and she didn't think about the cost of his suit or the fact that half the room's net worth was watching her on camera, because she'd practiced this years ago under fluorescent classroom lights before tuition notices and hospital bills forced her to quit, before her mother's diagnosis turned Harper's life into invoices, overtime, and the constant fear of one more call from a doctor. She pushed. 1, 2, 3. Steady rhythm, controlled depth, the only kind of control that mattered now. "Stop!" Victor barked, near hysterical. "You're going to kill him!" Harper didn't miss a beat. "He's already dying," she shot back. "Count or move." A guest made a choking sound. Another whispered, "Is she trained?" And Celeste's face tightened with fury that flashed through her polished concern.
"She's a waitress," Celeste said, like that sentence ended the argument and made Harper small again. Harper didn't answer. She kept compressions going, listening for tiny changes that told her whether she was buying time or losing it, and she felt Julian's skin getting colder under her hands. "Where's the medic?" Victor shouted, voice breaking. "Where is the ambulance?" "On the way," someone replied, shaking. 2 minutes. 2 minutes was an eternity when a heart was negotiating with darkness. Harper glanced up once, just once, and caught a detail that didn't fit the scene. Julian's wine glass wasn't where it had been. There was a clean, wet ring on the tablecloth near the place setting, fresh condensation that hadn't had time to dry, and a second identical glass sat closer to Julian's plate than it should have, the rim marked by a faint smear that looked like a thumb had pressed and slid. Harper smelled that bitter note again, faint but stubborn, and she locked it away in her mind even as Victor snapped, "Stop looking around!" Harper pushed harder. "If you want him alive, let me work." The doors finally burst open and 2 paramedics rushed in, cutting through velvet and wealth like it was paper. One knelt beside Harper immediately, gloved hands moving with practiced speed. "Step back," the lead medic ordered. Harper didn't. "He stopped breathing," she said fast. "Weak, irregular pulse before it dropped. Sudden collapse, cyanosis, not a food obstruction. His drink smelled bitter, wrong, and the glass moved." The medic's eyes flicked to her, sharp. "You trained?" "Not finished," Harper said, "but I'm right." He didn't argue. He dropped an airway, checked pupils, scanned the room like he was counting threats, then snapped, "Stretcher, now!" Celeste surged forward, voice cracking with perfect performance. "I'm his fiancée. Move! I need to—" A paramedic blocked her without looking up. "Ma'am, stand back." Celeste's eyes flashed. "Do you know who I—" "Not now," the medic cut her off, and his gaze wasn't casual when it landed on the table, on the glasses, on the fresh ring of condensation. Harper saw him pause a fraction, saw him inhale like he'd caught the same bitter edge. And then his expression shifted by 1 degree, from medical concern to something else. Something that belonged to crime scenes and questions. He looked at Harper again, lower this time so only she could hear. "Don't let anyone touch that glass," he said quietly. "And don't let anyone leave." The words hit Harper harder than the collapse did, because suddenly, this wasn't just an emergency, and the people with the most to lose were already standing between the doors and the truth. Cliffhanger. The lead medic leaned closer, voice barely audible as sirens grew louder outside. "This doesn't look like a feint," he said. "It looks like someone tried to take him out, right here." The paramedics moved with the kind of urgency that didn't care about velvet ropes or billion-dollar egos, and as they slid Julian Royce onto the stretcher, The VIP room tried to pretend it wasn't watching a life get hauled away like a scandal. Harper's hands were still hovering over Julian's chest when the lead medic finally pushed her back with a firm forearm. Not unkindly, just decisively. And the moment Harper's knees left the carpet, she felt the room rush in to fill the space she'd occupied, hungry to rewrite what had happened into something safer for them. Victor was already doing it, his voice loud, shaky, performative, aimed at phones and insurance and whoever would answer tomorrow. She panicked, he insisted, pointing at Harper as if she'd spilled a drink instead of forcing breath back into a man's body.
She touched him without permission. She disrupted service.
Celeste stood near Julian's chair, like a statue carved from anger and lipstick. Her eyes glossy enough to sell concern, her posture rigid enough to signal control. And she didn't correct Victor, because Victor's story kept the spotlight off her. Harper kept her face neutral, while her pulse hammered, because she knew something none of them wanted to admit out loud. The glass had moved. The bitter scent had been real, and the moment the medic called it wrong, the room became a cage built out of reputation. "No one leaves," one of the guards repeated, stepping wider at the doors. And Harper felt the word leave become a luxury item she didn't own. The lead medic snapped commands at his partner, checked Julian's airway again, and then, quick as a blink, leaned down to Harper's ear like he was handing her a secret with weight. "You did the right thing," he murmured. "But if you saw something, don't say it in this room." Harper's eyes flicked toward the table, toward the two glasses, toward the clean, wet ring that proved time and hands had been involved, and then back to the medic's face. "It smelled bitter," she whispered, choosing her words like they could get her killed. "And the glass placement was wrong." The medic's jaw tightened in a way that didn't belong to fainting spells. "Stay available," he said. "Hospital's going to ask questions." Then he pushed the stretcher through the crowd, and people moved as if money gave them permission to part for an ambulance, while still filming, still whispering, still pretending they weren't praying in their own way. Harper tried to follow, but Victor cut her off with a hard hand on her shoulder, his voice dropping to a poisonous hiss meant only for her. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "Do you understand the mess you just made?" Harper looked down at his hand, then up at his eyes, and spoke with a calm that made him blink. "I made a mess," she said.
Or I stopped one. Victor's face flushed. "Do you want this place sued into the ground?" he spat. "Do you want me ruined because you played doctor?"
"I didn't play," Harper said, and she felt the ache in her wrists from compressions like proof she didn't need to argue. Behind Victor, Celeste glided closer, perfume and power, her voice soft enough to sound civilized and sharp enough to cut. "Harper, right?" she asked, as if Harper's name was something she'd found on a menu. Harper didn't answer immediately, because she could see the calculation behind Celeste's eyes. Find the weak link, press it, make the story obey. "Yes," Harper said finally. Celeste's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You should be careful," she murmured. "People in this room don't like surprises." Harper held her gaze. "Neither do I," she replied, and Celeste's smile thinned like she'd tasted defiance and hated the flavor. A guard stepped in, not between Celeste and Harper, but between Harper and the corridor the stretcher had disappeared down. And Harper understood that whatever Victor feared, Celeste controlled. "She's coming with us," Celeste told the guard. And Victor's posture immediately changed, relief sliding into him because the problem was being removed from his payroll. "Of course," Victor said quickly, too quick, as if he'd been waiting for an excuse to hand Harper to someone else. Harper's stomach tightened, because being taken wasn't the same as being helped, and she suddenly felt how small she was in a building built to make people like her disappear politely. "I didn't do anything wrong," Harper said, keeping her voice steady.
Celeste tilted her head. "That's not how this works," she said, and she walked first, expecting Harper to follow like a trained pet. Harper did follow, because refusing would turn this into a struggle, and struggles became headlines that always blamed the poor.
In the service corridor, the world changed from chandeliers to fluorescent lights, from curated elegance to the building's spine, and Harper caught sight of her own reflection in a steel panel, black uniform, hair pinned back, face pale, eyes too awake, and she hated that she looked exactly like someone who could be blamed. They reached a side door where the ambulance lights flashed against the wet street outside, and the cold air hit Harper's cheeks like a slap. The stretcher was being loaded, Julian strapped down, oxygen hissing, monitors beeping with a rhythm that sounded like time being counted. The medic glanced at Harper as if to confirm she was still there, then looked past her and stiffened slightly at Celeste's presence. Celeste swept forward, voice rising, performance back on. "I'm his fiancée," she announced. "I'm going with him." The medic didn't bother hiding his impatience. "One passenger," he said. "Family or medical?" Celeste's eyes narrowed, and for a split second Harper expected her to win by sheer entitlement. But then a black SUV rolled up like a shadow arriving on schedule, and a man stepped out who didn't look like restaurant security or hotel staff. He wore a simple suit, no flash, but his posture carried authority like a weapon, and his eyes went straight to the medic, then to Julian, then to Harper, as if he was already sorting the scene into threats and assets. "I'm Mr. Royce's head of security," he said calmly. "Her too," he added, nodding toward Harper as though her presence had already been decided. Celeste's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me?" The man didn't flinch. "He asked for medical transparency," he said, tone neutral. "We'll get it." Harper felt her heart kick. Julian hadn't asked for anything, not while he was unconscious, unless someone had already been anticipating his orders, unless Julian's world was always prepared to move like this, even when he didn't. The medic climbed into the ambulance and the doors slammed, leaving Celeste on the curb with her perfect expression cracking at the edges. "You can't keep me from him," she snapped, but the security man didn't look at her. He looked at Harper again. "Name?" he asked. "Harper Lane," she said. "Harper Lane," he repeated, like he was memorizing a password. "You're coming," he said, "to the hospital." Victor, who had followed like a cowardly shadow, tried to insert himself. "She works for me," he blurted. "She's on shift, she—" The security man finally glanced at Victor, and the look was so cold, Victor visibly shrank. "Not anymore," the man said, and he said it like a fact, not a threat. Harper's throat tightened with a sudden, ugly fear, because losing this job meant losing rent, and losing rent meant losing the fragile system she'd built to keep her mother's medications paid and her life barely upright. But she forced herself to keep walking, because fear was a leash, and she refused to let anyone hold it. Inside the SUV, the leather smelled new, and the silence felt expensive. And as they drove, Harper stared at her hands, noticing the faint red marks from where she'd pressed on Julian's chest. And she wondered if those marks would be used as evidence for her or against her. At the hospital entrance, the world turned clinical and bright, and Julian disappeared behind double doors into ICU intake, while Harper was guided into a waiting area that didn't look like a waiting area at all. Private, quiet, guarded, designed for people who didn't sit among the public. A nurse asked for her name and role, and Harper said, "Waitress," and watched the nurse's eyebrows lift in disbelief, because the idea of a waitress being relevant in this wing felt like a mistake the building wanted to correct. Minutes dragged like hours, and in the gaps, Harper's real life kept trying to claw back in. The overdue notice in her bag, the voicemail she hadn't checked from her mother's clinic, The second shift she was supposed to start tomorrow to cover a bill that didn't care about billionaires. Celeste appeared again, hair perfect, eyes red now in a way that looked practiced. And she didn't sit, she paced. And every time she passed Harper, she let her shoulder brush close enough to feel intentional. "If he doesn't make it," Celeste said softly, stopping just out of arm's reach, "everyone will want a reason." Harper looked up. "Is that a warning?" she asked. Celeste smiled as if offended by the accusation. "It's reality," she replied. The head of security returned with another man in a crisp suit and a tablet, and they asked Harper questions that sounded polite but were built like traps. What did he drink? Who served it? Where did the glass come from? Did anyone touch the table? Did she have any history with Julian Royce? Did she know him? Had she ever been in this restaurant before? Harper answered carefully, truthfully but not weakly, and she watched their eyes sharpen at the parts where she didn't hesitate, where she described symptoms with the wrong kind of clarity for someone who carried plates.
"You said cyanosis," the man with the tablet noted, voice flat. "That's not a word we hear from waitstaff."
Harper swallowed. "I used to be in nursing school," she said, and she didn't add the rest. How she dropped out when money stopped being math and became a cliff. How she traded her future for her mother's next prescription, because love wasn't romantic, it was invoices. The man's gaze held hers a second longer, as if deciding whether her past made her a hero or a suspect. Then a doctor stepped into the private waiting area, mask down, eyes serious, and the room changed shape around his presence. Celeste rushed forward. "Is he okay?" she demanded.
The doctor's tone was controlled. "He's stable," he said. "But this presentation is concerning." Harper felt her stomach tighten. "Concerning how?" she asked, and Celeste's head snapped towards her like she'd forgotten Harper was allowed to speak. The doctor looked at Harper, then at the security men, then back. "It doesn't match a simple syncope episode," he said. "We're running toxicology, and we've contacted the appropriate parties because of what the paramedics reported."
Celeste's breath caught. "Toxicology," she repeated, too loud. The doctor's eyes didn't soften.
"Yes," he said. "And if this was exposure, timing matters. We need the chain of events." The security man nodded once, already moving. "We'll secure footage," he said.
Harper's pulse surged, because footage meant the glasses, the hands, the moment the ring of condensation appeared, and in her mind she saw that second glass again, too close, too identical, too easy to confuse. A nurse hurried in, speaking quietly to the doctor, and the doctor's posture shifted.
"He's waking,"
the doctor said, and Celeste straightened instantly as if a camera had just turned on. The head of security didn't move.
"He's going to ask questions," he said to no one in particular.
Then, a moment later, a man in scrubs opened the ICU door and motioned them forward, and Harper's feet felt heavy as she followed, because every step was taking her deeper into a world that didn't forgive mistakes. They stopped at the threshold. Julian lay in a bed under harsh light, skin pale, eyes half open, a monitor ticking softly beside him like a metronome for power. He looked weak, but the first thing Harper noticed was that his gaze was already focused, already calculating, already searching the room the way a predator searched a field. His eyes landed on Celeste for a fraction of a second, then slid past her like she was furniture, and locked onto Harper with a clarity that made Harper's spine go cold.
"You didn't ask if you'd scared anyone, or if the restaurant was okay, or if Celeste was all right." He swallowed once, voice rough but controlled, and delivered his first words like an order that rewrote reality. "Find the waitress," he said. "Bring her closer. Lock the restaurant down. I want the footage. No one leaves." Julian's gaze didn't break from Harper as the room scrambled to obey, and his voice dropped to a quieter, sharper line. "Tell me what you smelled," he said, "and don't lie to me." Julian's eyes stayed on Harper as if she were the only stable object in a room that had suddenly turned slippery, and when he repeated, "Tell me what you smelled," it didn't sound like curiosity or gratitude. It sounded like a man trying to anchor reality before someone rewrote it around him. Harper kept her voice level because she understood something his entourage didn't. Panic was a luxury, and the people who could afford it were usually the ones who got everyone else hurt. "It was sharp," she said, choosing plain words that still carried weight. "Bitter, almost like almonds, but not food, more like something that didn't belong near wine. And the glass wasn't where it had been. There was a fresh condensation ring, and a second identical glass was closer to your plate than it should have been." Celeste's head snapped toward Harper, eyes flashing with outrage that arrived too fast to be only fear. "Are you accusing someone?" Celeste asked, voice tight, already shaping the narrative. Harper didn't look at her. "I'm describing what I saw," she said, and felt Julian's gaze sharpen, as if the distinction mattered to him more than it did to anyone else. Adrian Cross, Julian's head of security, the man who moved like a locked door, shifted a fraction and spoke into his earpiece without raising his voice, and Harper caught fragments that told her everything. Footage, staff list, table service logs, hold exits, identify hands on tray.
Victor hovered behind them like a man praying the spotlight wouldn't land on him, his face still flushed from adrenaline and guilt, while the doctor's expression stayed professionally neutral even as his eyes carried a darker edge. "We're running a full panel," the doctor said, "but I want to be clear. This is not presenting like a simple faint. The timing, the respiratory distress, the sudden cyanosis, something triggered a rapid cascade." Celeste inhaled sharply. "Triggered," she repeated, as if the word itself was an insult. Julian didn't look at her. "How long until you know?" he asked the doctor. "Preliminary results can come fast," the doctor answered, "but confirmation takes time." Julian's fingers flexed once against the blanket, and Harper noticed how quickly his body obeyed his will, even after nearly failing, as if weakness in him was a temporary state, not an identity. "Time is what they needed," Julian said quietly, more to himself than anyone. And then he looked at Adrian again. "Lock the restaurant down," he repeated, "and I want every angle, every hallway, every hand. Nobody leaves until you've got names." Adrian nodded once, already moving. The door to the ICU area opened and closed in controlled bursts as staff and security flowed like a machine. Harper watched it happen and felt a cold, inconvenient realization settle in. Julian's first order didn't just change her night, it changed the building's rules. And buildings like this didn't like having their rules changed by waitresses. A nurse guided Harper back to the private waiting area, and for a moment, the bright clinical corridor swallowed the luxury she'd just come from, replacing it with sterile air and the hum of machines. But the power dynamic followed anyway, because Adrian stayed close enough to make it clear she wasn't a guest here. She was evidence. Harper's phone buzzed inside her pocket, a small, violent vibration that nearly made her flinch. And when she glanced down, she saw the clinic's number, her mother's clinic, lighting the screen like a warning. She didn't answer, because Adrian's gaze slid toward it immediately. Not invasive, just aware. And Harper knew that in Julian's orbit, even private problems became data points. The call stopped, then came again, and Harper's throat tightened. She finally looked up at Adrian and said, "I need to take that." Adrian didn't say no. He didn't say yes. He simply watched her as if her next move mattered. Harper answered on the second ring and turned her body slightly away, lowering her voice. "Hi, this is Harper," she said, trying to sound normal while her heart hammered. The nurse on the line spoke quickly, apologetically, and Harper heard the words she feared most. Medication, authorization, balance due, tomorrow.
Harper closed her eyes for half a second and forced herself to breathe. "I'll handle it," she said, even though she didn't know how, even though handling it had been her full-time job for months, and the numbers still kept winning. When she hung up, her hand didn't shake, but her chest felt tight in a different way. Less fear of danger, more fear of being crushed quietly by bills while the world watched a billionaire's drama unfold. Celeste appeared in the waiting area like she owned the air, her expression smoothed into something camera-ready again, and she spoke as if Harper were a stain she was trying to wipe off a white glove. "You should go home," Celeste said softly. "You've done enough." Harper met her eyes. "I don't think I have," she replied, and Celeste's smile thinned. "Be careful," Celeste murmured, leaning in just enough that her perfume wrapped around Harper's senses in a heavy, expensive cloud. "You don't understand how quickly people get blamed when powerful men almost die." Harper didn't look away. "I understand exactly," she said, and as Celeste passed, Harper caught it again. A faint, sharp note under the perfume. Not the same as the glass, but close enough to make Harper's stomach clench, like two similar chemicals living in the same room. A few minutes later, Julian was moved to a private suite for observation, and the shift was immediate. Fewer nurses, tighter hallways, guards posted at angles that blocked sightlines, doors that clicked with a finality that had nothing to do with patient comfort and everything to do with control. Adrian stopped Harper outside the suite's door and said, "He wants you inside." Harper's instinct screamed that stepping into that room would change her life in ways she couldn't afford. But she stepped anyway, because the people who tried to kill Julian had already seen her face, and the safest place might be the one place they couldn't touch without consequences. Julian lay propped against pillows, IV line taped neatly, monitor beeping steady, his skin still pale, but his eyes fully awake now. And when Harper entered, he studied her with the same ruthless focus he'd used in the restaurant. Except now it carried something else, too. An assessment of whether she was a risk, a resource, or both. "You didn't hesitate," Julian said. "Most people in that room would have hesitated." Harper kept her hands clasped to hide the faint soreness in her wrists. "Hesitating wasn't an option," she replied. Julian watched her for a beat, then spoke with brutal simplicity. "You have bills," he said. It wasn't a question. Harper's jaw tightened. "Everyone has bills," she said. Julian's gaze didn't move. "Not like yours," he replied, and Harper felt heat rise in her face because she hated being read that easily, especially by someone who could solve her problems with a signature. "What do you want from me?" she asked, making the sentence clean and sharp so it didn't sound like begging. Julian's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but it didn't soften him.
"The truth," he said, "and your memory. Because someone tried to take me out in a room full of witnesses, which means they either thought they owned the witnesses, or they thought they could make one of them the villain." Harper held his gaze, and the air between them tightened with a strange kind of respect. The kind that didn't feel romantic yet, but did feel dangerous, because it made her matter in a world that usually ignored her. Julian turned his head slightly toward Adrian, who was standing near the door like a shadow with a pulse.
"Get me the footage,"
Julian said.
"and get me the table service chain. Who carried what? Who touched what? Who poured what? I want names, not excuses."
Adrian nodded.
"And Harper,"
Julian added, looking back at her.
"you're not going back to that restaurant."
Harper's stomach dropped. "I need my job," she said before she could stop herself, because pride didn't pay for prescriptions. Julian's eyes stayed steady.
"No,"
he said.
"You need to stay alive."
Harper's throat tightened. "So you're keeping me here," she said, and tried to make it sound like a fact instead of fear. Julian didn't deny it.
"I'm giving you a choice,"
he replied, and the phrasing hit like cold water, because it was the exact kind of choice powerful men offered,
when they wanted obedience dressed as freedom.
You help me figure out who did this, and I make sure your life stops collapsing around you. Or you walk away right now, and you hope the people who planned this don't decide you're a loose end.
Harper stared at him, anger sparking under her calm. "That's not a choice," she said. Julian's voice stayed even.
No,
He agreed.
it's survival.
Adrian's earpiece crackled softly, and his gaze flicked toward the hallway. "We have an issue," he said. Julian didn't move, but the air sharpened anyway.
What issue?
Julian asked. Adrian hesitated just long enough to make Harper's skin prickle. "Your board liaison is here," Adrian said.
He says it's urgent. Julian's eyes narrowed. Bring him in, he ordered. A man stepped into the suite, wearing a suit that tried to look friendly and expensive at the same time. Tablet in hand, smile calibrated for cameras that weren't present, and he glanced at Harper with polite surprise that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Royce," the man said smoothly. "Thank God you're awake." Julian didn't return the warmth. "Spare me," he said. The man's smile held. "Of course," he replied, then turned slightly towards Harper, as if she were a procedural problem that needed to be contained. "And you must be the waitress," he added, voice still pleasant. Harper didn't like the way he said waitress. It sounded like a category, not a person. "Harper," Julian corrected, and the man blinked once, adjusting. "Harper," the man repeated, then set a thin folder on the side table with the carefulness of someone placing a trap. "There are protocols," he said, "statements that need to be signed for everyone's protection. We should keep this clean." Julian's gaze went colder. "Clean for who?" he asked. The man's smile stayed polite. "Clean for you," he said, and slid the folder a few inches closer to Harper, not Julian, as if the first signature he wanted wasn't the billionaire's at all. Harper looked down, and the top page made her blood turn cold because it wasn't a witness statement. It was a liability transfer dressed up in formal language, and the first line that mattered read like a verdict waiting for a pen. The man's voice softened into something almost kind as he tapped the signature line. "You have a choice," he told Harper. "Sign, take the money, and disappear. Or don't sign and become the easiest person to blame." The board liaison's smile stayed pleasant as he slid the folder closer to Harper. Like kindness could make a trap feel voluntary. And when he tapped the signature line again, his fingertip made a tiny, decisive sound against the paper that Harper felt in her teeth. "You have a choice," he said softly. "Sign, take the money, and disappear. Or don't sign and become the easiest person to blame." Harper stared at the page and saw the trick instantly. It wasn't a witness statement. It was a liability transfer dressed in polite language. A document that would let the restaurant and Julian's people say she acted without authorization, that she interfered, that she created the incident, and that any fallout was on her, not them. Harper's pulse hit hard, but her voice stayed flat. "This says I caused it," she replied. The liaison's smile didn't change. "It says you acted independently," he corrected, as if the difference mattered. Celeste's perfume seemed to thicken in the room, and Harper could feel her presence like pressure on her shoulder even before she spoke. "Harper," Celeste murmured, almost tender, "be smart. Take the help. You don't want to be dragged into this." Harper looked up at Julian, expecting him to be cold again, calculating again, but his expression was still, sharp, and irritated in a way that wasn't aimed at Harper. "Give me that," Julian said, not loudly, but with the kind of command that made nurses pause in the doorway and made Adrian's posture go subtly tighter. The liaison hesitated, still smiling, still trying to keep control of the narrative, and that hesitation was all Julian needed to show him he'd misjudged the room.
Now, Julian repeated, and the smile finally slipped on the liaison's face as he placed the folder into Julian's hand.
Julian scanned one paragraph, then another, and Harper watched his jaw set as if each line was another proof he'd been surrounded by people who confused protecting him with owning him. Julian looked up at the liaison. "Who sent you?" he asked. The liaison's smile returned, thinner. "No one sent me," he lied. Julian nodded once as if he'd expected the lie, then tore the first page cleanly in half and dropped it into the trash by the door like it was nothing. "Here's your protocol," Julian said. "Get out." Celeste inhaled sharply. "Julian, not you," Julian cut her off without even looking at her, and Harper felt the power shift like a door unlocking somewhere deep in the building. The liaison's tone stayed smooth, but a warning finally showed through. "Mr. Royce, you're not fully recovered," he said. "This isn't the time to make emotional decisions." Julian's eyes went colder. "This is exactly the time," he replied, "because whoever wrote this thought I'd wake up confused and grateful." He flicked his gaze to Harper, and they thought she'd be desperate. Harper hated how accurate that was, because she was desperate, and being desperate didn't make her weak, it just made her a target. Adrian stepped forward half a pace, not touching the liaison, not needing to. "Sir," Adrian said calmly, "the restaurant is locked down. We pulled initial footage. There's something you should see." The liaison's head turned too quickly, like the words footage had teeth, and Harper caught it. Julian caught it too. "Hold him," Julian said, and the simple sentence made the liaison's smile finally die. "You can't detain me," the liaison snapped. Julian's voice stayed level. "I'm not detaining you," he said. "I'm delaying you until I understand whether you're incompetent or complicit." The liaison's eyes flashed, and Harper saw his next move form. Call someone. Escalate. Turn this into "Julian is unstable." Make the billionaire look irrational so the board could protect the company from him. Julian didn't give him time. He lifted his phone, thumb moving once, and Harper realized with a small jolt that even in a hospital bed, Julian still controlled a network that could move faster than paperwork. "Put legal on," Julian said into the phone. "And call my chief of staff. I want my private counsel here in 15 minutes. Celeste's face tightened with something close to panic, and she recovered so fast Harper almost missed it. "Julian, please," Celeste said, soft again, public again. "You need rest." Julian finally looked at her, and the look was so direct Celeste went still. "Rest is what they wanted," he said. "Now tell me why you're more worried about paperwork than the fact someone tried to stop my lungs." Harper felt a strange, dangerous warmth in her chest at the way he said, "my lungs," not my company, not my reputation, as if tonight had forced him to remember he was still made of flesh, and she hated herself a little for noticing. Adrian slid a tablet into Julian's hand and turned the screen so Harper could see too. The footage was grainy but clear enough. The VIP table, the white cloth, Julian's glass near his right hand, Celeste leaning in with a bright smile, Victor hovering with that eager fear he wore like a uniform, and Harper approaching with a tray. The timestamp ticked. In the footage, Harper saw it again. The moment Julian looked away to answer a guest. The moment Celeste's hand rose as if adjusting a napkin. The moment a second hand entered the frame from the side, quick and confident, and the glass moved. Harper's breath caught, because the hand wore a ring that flashed once under the chandelier, a distinctive shape, and the owner of that ring wasn't Harper, wasn't Victor, wasn't Celeste either. Harper's eyes snapped toward the liaison. His right hand was clenched at his side, and the ring on it matched the flash in the footage like a fingerprint. The liaison followed Harper's gaze and stiffened, just a fraction, and that fraction was enough. Julian's expression didn't change, but the room felt colder. "That's you," Julian said quietly, and it wasn't an accusation yet, it was a confirmation. The liaison tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. "That could be anyone," he said. Harper leaned closer to the tablet, forcing her brain to stay clinical. "Pause," she said, and Adrian froze the frame. Harper pointed without touching the screen. "That ring has a flat face and a cut corner," she said. "It's not common. And the hand comes from the service side, not the guest side." The liaison's voice rose a notch. "This is absurd," he said. "Are you taking the word of a waitress over—" Julian's voice cut through him. "Her name is Harper," Julian said, and the way he said it made Harper's stomach flip, in a way she didn't like because it felt like protection, and protection always came with a price in worlds like his. Julian nodded once at Adrian. "Escort him," he said, "and if he steps outside this wing, I want 2 agents behind him, and every call he makes logged." The liaison's face went pale. "You can't." Adrian's tone stayed calm. "We can," he said, "because you're in a private suite and you're interfering with an active medical investigation." The liaison looked to Celeste like she expected rescue. Celeste didn't move. Harper saw it then, clear as glass. Celeste wasn't surprised the liaison's hand had been near the drink. She was surprised the footage existed. Julian watched Celeste for one long second, and Harper could feel the quiet damage forming. Adrian guided the liaison toward the door, and the liaison leaned closer to Harper as he passed, voice low enough to be meant as a private cut. "You think you just became important," he hissed. "You just became convenient." Harper didn't flinch. "Then stop making me convenient," she replied, and the liaison's eyes sharpened with something ugly before the door shut behind him. For a moment the room held its breath, and then Julian exhaled slowly, as if he'd been carrying anger in his chest alongside the IV line. He looked at Harper again, and his voice dropped into something dangerously controlled. "You're right," he said. "You didn't have a choice in that restaurant." Harper's throat tightened. "I still don't," she said. Julian nodded once, like he respected the honesty. "You do now," he replied. "Because my first order stands. Lock the place down, pull every angle, and you're coming with me to the restaurant." Harper blinked. "Now?" "Now," Julian said, and his eyes flicked to the doctor. "Clear it." The doctor started to protest. Julian didn't argue. He outmaneuvered. "If I stay here, they finish what they started," he said. "If I move, they have to chase." Adrian's phone buzzed, and the expression on his face tightened when he read the message. "We have another problem," Adrian said. Julian's gaze sharpened. "Say it." Adrian looked at Harper. "Someone just called the clinic number listed under your emergency contacts," he said. "They asked for your mother by name." Harper felt the blood drain from her face, because she hadn't told anyone here her mother's name, and the only way they had that information was if someone had already pulled her file, already treated her life like leverage. Julian's voice went very quiet. "They touched your family," he said, and the softness in his tone wasn't kindness, it was fury. Harper swallowed hard, forcing herself not to shake. "So it wasn't just about you," she whispered. Julian's eyes locked onto hers. "It never is," he said. "It's chess."
Cliffhanger. Adrian's phone buzzed again, and this time he didn't need to read it for Harper to feel the threat in the air. "They're erasing footage," Adrian said. "Right now. At Le Marceau." Julian didn't sit up fast, but the room still rearranged itself around the intent in his eyes, because intent was the only thing that travelled faster than money. "They're erasing footage," Adrian said again, and this time his voice carried a sharp edge Harper hadn't heard from him yet.
Right now, at Le Marceau. Harper felt her throat tighten, as if someone had placed a hand there. Not because she was surprised, but because she understood the shape of the move. If the footage died, the story became words again, and words were easy to bend until the waitress looked like the problem, and the billionaire looked like an unfortunate victim of staff incompetence. Julian's gaze flicked to the tablet, then to the door, then to Harper, and he made the next decision with clinical speed. "We move," he said. The doctor started to protest, as doctors always did when a powerful patient tried to turn recovery into strategy. "Mr. Royce, you're not cleared to—" Julian cut him off without raising his voice. "If I'm here when they finish wiping the evidence, I won't be alive long enough for your clearance to matter," he said, and then he looked at Adrian. "Get the car, get 2 EMTs to ride, and get me a portable monitor." Adrian didn't argue. He was already walking. Celeste stepped forward, composure cracking just enough to show the fear underneath. "Julian, this is insane," she said. "You need rest." Julian looked at her like she was a document he'd finally read properly. "Rest is what you needed," he replied, and Harper felt the sting of it even though it wasn't aimed at her, because it was the first time Celeste had been addressed like she wasn't in control. Celeste's face tightened. "You think I did this?" she demanded. Julian didn't answer her directly. He answered the room.
"I think someone close to me thought they could control what I saw," he said. "And someone close to me thought they could control what she said." Harper's stomach clenched at the word she, because being spoken about that way in a room of power always meant you were already being moved like a piece. Harper stepped forward, forcing her voice to stay steady. "If they're erasing footage, going back there is dangerous," she said. Julian's eyes stayed on hers. "Everything is dangerous," he replied. "The only difference is whether we let them choose the battlefield." A nurse arrived with a clipboard, flustered, trying to pretend this was normal. Adrian returned with 2 men who looked like medical staff but moved like security. And within minutes, Julian was being transferred from bed to a chair and then to a wheelchair that didn't squeak, because nothing around him was allowed to sound cheap. Harper watched the choreography, and what scared her wasn't the efficiency. What scared her was how practiced it was, as if Julian's life regularly included moments where moving a billionaire through a hospital like a tactical package made sense. In the hallway, Harper felt eyes on her. Nurses, staff, strangers, wondering why a waitress was part of this procession. And she hated the exposure, because exposure meant someone could find her again. Adrian fell into step beside Harper, voice low. "Stay close," he said. "No side calls, no wandering." Harper's jaw tightened. "My mother," she said. Adrian's gaze stayed forward. "We're handling it," he replied, and Harper didn't like the certainty, because she'd spent years learning that when powerful people said we, they usually meant you. They exited through a private entrance where rain slicked the pavement and camera flashes from the street bounced off black glass, and a matte black SUV waited with the engine running like it had been summoned by thought. Julian was lifted inside with careful hands and zero gentleness, because gentleness wasn't the goal. Control was. Harper climbed in after him, leather cold under her palms, and the door shut with a heavy, final sound that made her feel like she'd crossed into a different jurisdiction. The city blurred past in wet streaks of neon as they moved, and Harper watched Julian's profile in the dim interior light. Pale skin, jaw set, eyes focused forward. And she couldn't tell whether he was furious or simply awake in a way that never turned off. "Tell me exactly where you were standing," Julian said suddenly, voice rough but precise. Harper blinked and forced her mind back to the table, the chandelier, the ring flash. "I approached from the service side," she said. "Victor was behind me. Celeste was to your left. The board liaison was on your right side, slightly behind your shoulder. His hand could reach your glass without leaning." Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. And the second glass? It appeared where it shouldn't be, Harper said. There was a fresh ring. Someone swapped it fast, like they'd practiced. Julian's fingers flexed once, as if he could feel the swap in his own body. Practice, he repeated. That means staff. Harper's stomach tightened at the thought of Victor, because Victor had been eager to blame her before he even knew what happened. Julian looked at her again. You said you smelled almonds, he said. Harper hesitated. I said it was bitter, like almonds, she corrected carefully, but not food, more chemical. Julian's gaze sharpened in approval or relief. She couldn't tell which. Good, he said. You don't dramatize, you observe. Harper didn't answer, because being praised by a man like Julian felt as dangerous as being threatened. Both meant he was paying attention. The SUV turned, slowed, then slid into the private drop-off lane behind Le Massot, where the restaurant's polished facade gave way to service doors and concrete walls, and Harper felt her pulse spike, as if her body recognized the place as a trap now. Adrian exited first, scanning the alleyway and the security cameras mounted high on the brick. We're late, he said, voice clipped. They're already inside the system. Julian was rolled out and moved through the service entrance not like a patient, but like a returning owner, and Harper noticed how staff snapped to attention the moment they saw him, as if his presence rewrote the rules without needing to speak. Victor appeared from the corridor, with his face set in a mask of panic that instantly shifted into relief when he saw Julian alive. Mr. Royce, Victor gushed, voice too loud, too eager. Thank God! We've been doing everything we can. Julian raised a hand, and Victor stopped mid-sentence as if he'd hit an invisible wall. Where's the footage? Julian asked. Victor swallowed. We're pulling it, he said. There was a technical what? Julian asked, and Harper felt the cold in his voice like a blade being drawn slowly. Victor's eyes flicked toward Harper for a fraction, and Harper caught it. Not guilt, not fear for Julian, fear of Harper. Fear of what she had seen and remembered. It's in process, Victor repeated, and the repetition sounded like a lie trying to become true. Adrian stepped past Victor without touching him and headed straight for the security office with the confidence of someone who already owned the keys. Who has admin access? Adrian asked. Victor's throat bobbed. Our IT vendor. Names, Julian said, voice flat. Victor's lips parted. There's also, he started, and then he hesitated. And that hesitation was a confession in a place built on polished certainty.
Harper's eyes tracked the corridor behind Victor, and she saw movement. A staff member in a crisp white shirt hurrying away with a small black case, head down, pace too fast, as if leaving before anyone could notice mattered more than looking normal. Harper's brain snapped into focus. That's not kitchen, she said quietly. Adrian's head turned instantly. Stop, he barked, and the word hit the hall like a gunshot without the noise. The staff member froze for half a beat, then bolted, the black case bouncing against his thigh. Adrian moved after him with brutal efficiency. 2 guards followed. Harper took a step forward without thinking, and Julian's voice cut through her movement. Harper, he said, and it wasn't a warning. It was an anchor. Harper stopped, forced herself to breathe, and watched as Adrian slammed the fleeing man into a wall in the service corridor with controlled force. Not enough to injure, enough to end the running. The black case clattered to the floor and popped open. Inside wasn't a laptop. It was a portable drive kit. Cables, adapters, a small device with blinking lights, tools designed for one purpose: take data fast and leave nothing behind. Victor's face went grey. I can explain, he began, and Julian turned his head slowly toward him. No, Julian said. You can't. The man Adrian had caught tried to speak,
but Adrian held him still with one hand and lifted the device with the other like evidence. "This is active," Adrian said. "It's pulling camera archives." Harper's stomach dropped because it meant her worst fear was true. Someone had been wiping the only clean proof while she sat in a hospital waiting area. And if they'd had access that deep, they weren't just trying to avoid scandal, they were trying to erase a crime. Julian's gaze slid past Victor and landed on the service hallway camera mounted in the corner, its tiny red light steady, watching. "How many people know this system?" Julian asked. Victor's lips trembled.
"It's standard," he stammered. Julian's voice stayed calm, and that calm was terrifying. "You had a choice," he said. "Protect your guests, or protect your paycheck." Victor's eyes filled with tears that looked real now. "I have staff," he pleaded. "I have a business. You don't understand." Julian leaned forward slightly in the wheelchair, and the room seemed to lean with him. "I understand exactly," he said. "Someone tried to kill me, and you helped them clean." Victor's knees almost gave. "No," he whispered. "No, I didn't." Harper's mind flashed back to the moment Victor grabbed her arm and screamed liability, while Julian stopped breathing. Fear makes people do ugly things. But this wasn't fear anymore. This was coordination. Harper stepped closer, eyes scanning the open kit, and she saw a small folded paper inside the case, wedged under a cable. Not a receipt. A note. A delivery slip. A simple line with a time and a location. Penthouse. Midnight. Confirm compliance. Harper's chest tightened. Midnight. That was soon. And penthouse in a building like this didn't mean a party. It meant a decision made where witnesses didn't belong. Julian watched Harper's face change and knew instantly. "What is it?" he asked. Harper held the slip up, careful not to smudge it. "They weren't just erasing footage," she said. "They were reporting to someone." Julian's eyes hardened. "Who?" Harper swallowed. "It doesn't say who," she admitted. "But it says where." Julian's jaw set, and he looked at Adrian like he'd already decided the next move. "We're going upstairs," Julian said. Adrian hesitated for the first time. "Sir, you're not—" "I'm going," Julian repeated, and the authority in his voice made the hallway feel smaller. Celeste appeared at the end of the corridor, breathless, hair still perfect, eyes sharp as glass, and when she saw the open drive kit and Victor's face crumpling, she stopped too quickly, like she'd walked into a room she thought would already be cleaned. Her gaze snapped to Harper, and Harper felt it like a slap. Celeste didn't speak, but her expression said everything. "You weren't supposed to still be here." Julian noticed Celeste's stillness, and his voice dropped into something almost gentle, which was worse because it meant he was controlling himself. "Celeste," he said, "tell me why you look surprised." Celeste forced a smile. "I'm not surprised," she said. "I'm worried." Julian didn't blink. "Good," he replied. "Then you can come with us." Celeste's smile faltered for a fraction. Harper saw it. Adrian saw it. Julian saw it. And in that fraction, Harper understood the shape of the end game. The penthouse wasn't just a location. It was a trap waiting to close, and they were walking toward it, because the only way to survive a trap was to see who built it. Cliffhanger. Adrian's earpiece crackled, and his face went hard. "Sir," he said, "the board liaison is calling from the penthouse. He says if you come up, you'd better come alone." Adrian's earpiece crackled, and the message landed like a blade sliding into a sheath. The board liaison was calling from the penthouse, and he said if Julian came up, he'd better come alone.
which wasn't an invitation so much as a demand wrapped in fake courtesy, the kind powerful people used when they thought the building itself belonged to them. Harper watched Julian's face, expecting anger, expecting impulsive pride. But what surfaced was something colder and cleaner. A calm that didn't come from bravery. It came from calculation. "He wants me isolated," Julian said quietly, as if translating the real meaning for the room, and then he looked at Adrian. "That means he thinks he can force a signature." Adrian nodded once. "Or a confession," he said. "Or a disappearance," Harper added before she could stop herself, and the corridor went still for half a beat because everyone heard how easily she said it, as if she'd seen the shape of that move before.
Julian's gaze flicked to her. Not accusing, not surprised, just taking her in with that ruthless focus again. "You're right," he said. "That's why we don't give him the version of me he planned for." Celeste, standing at the end of the corridor with her perfect face and her perfectly timed worry, stepped forward like she belonged in every decision. "Julian, please," she said, voice soft. "Don't do this. Let Adrian handle it. Let the police handle it." Julian didn't raise his voice, but the air tightened anyway. "You didn't say police earlier," he replied. "You said paperwork." Celeste's smile strained. "I was trying to protect you," she insisted. Julian leaned forward slightly in his chair, and Harper felt it again, that gravitational pull of a man used to bending rooms. "Protect me from what?" Julian asked. "The truth?" Celeste swallowed. "From chaos," she said. Julian's eyes didn't blink. "Chaos is someone swapping my glass," he said. "Chaos is someone calling a clinic and asking for Harper's mother by name." Celeste's jaw tightened, just enough to show she'd been hit. Harper felt her stomach drop because it confirmed what she'd suspected since the ICU waiting area. Her life had been touched on purpose, not by accident, and once your family became leverage, you were never just a witness again. Julian turned to Adrian. "We go up," he said. Adrian hesitated. "Sir, alone?" Julian's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "No," he said, "but we let him think that for 30 seconds. Adrian's eyes narrowed in understanding. "You want a controlled reveal?" Julian nodded once. Then he looked at Harper, and the next sentence changed everything. "You're coming with me," he said. Harper's chest tightened. "That's not safe," she replied, because she had learned the hard way that safety was always the first thing sacrificed when powerful men started playing chess. Julian's voice stayed steady. "It's safer than being left behind while they rewrite you," he said. Harper wanted to argue, wanted to demand why a waitress had to walk into a penthouse trap. But she realized the answer was ugly and simple. She was the only person in this entire building who had no incentive to lie for Julian, which made her the only person his enemies couldn't easily discredit without exposing themselves. "Fine," Harper said, and forced steel into her tone. "But I'm not a prop." Julian held her gaze like he respected the line. "Good," he said. "Neither am I." Adrian moved fast after that, snapping orders into his earpiece, shifting guards like pieces, cutting off corridors, rerouting elevators, and the restaurant staff scattered, as if the building itself had suddenly admitted it was afraid. Victor was removed from the hallway with hands that were firm but controlled, his face crumpled and pleading, and Harper didn't feel satisfaction. She felt a grim certainty. Because men like Victor didn't invent crimes, they enabled them. And enabling was what kept the world running for the people at the top. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt too quiet, like the kind of quiet that existed right before a door opened on something irreversible. Harper stood beside Julian's chair, and in the reflective steel panel she saw herself again. Black uniform, tired eyes, jaw set. And she hated how easy it would be for this night to swallow her whole if she didn't hold on to her own name. When the doors opened, the penthouse corridor was a capsule of luxury. Thick carpet that killed footsteps, warm lighting that hid corners, art chosen for power more than beauty, and two men in suits who tried to look like staff but moved like handlers. One lifted a hand, smiling. "Mr. Royce," he said, "we're so relieved." Julian cut through him. "Move," he said, and the man moved. Because relief was for people who didn't own consequences.
The boardroom inside the penthouse was worse than the restaurant. Not because it was louder, but because it was cleaner. A long, dark table, floor-to-ceiling glass, a city skyline that looked like it belonged to whoever spoke first. And at the far end the board liaison sat with the calm of a man who believed he'd already won. A second figure stood near the window, hands behind his back, a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Harper didn't know his name, but she knew his type, the one who never touched the glass himself. "Julian," the liaison said, as if they were old friends. "Thank you for coming. Alone, I hope." Julian rolled forward just enough to make the room adjust around him. "You asked for a loan," he replied. "You don't get to ask anymore." The liaison's smile tightened. "You're not well," he said, and then his gaze slid to Harper, and irritation flickered, quick and sharp. "Why is she here?" Julian's voice stayed calm. "Because she's the reason I'm breathing," he said. "And because she remembers what you did with your right hand." The liaison's eyes flashed. "This is ridiculous," he said, and he reached for a folder on the table, as if paper could still be used as a weapon. "We need to stabilize the company, Julian. A medical incident like this..." "Stop," Julian said, and the single word landed like a door slamming. Adrian appeared in the doorway behind them, flanked by two uniformed officers in plain jackets. Not loud, not dramatic, just present enough to turn the liaison's confidence brittle. The liaison's posture shifted immediately, outrage trying to rise. "You brought police into my penthouse," Julian corrected, and his eyes went razor cold. "And I didn't bring them for a medical incident." Adrian stepped forward and set a tablet on the table, then another, then a sealed evidence bag containing the portable drive kit. "We have time-stamped footage pulls," Adrian said. "We have attempted deletion logs.
We have chain of custody from the device you used to extract data." The liaison's smile tried to return, but it couldn't find its place. "That proves nothing," he said too quickly. One of the officers spoke, tone flat. "It proves intent," he replied. The man by the window finally moved, and Harper watched him carefully, because his calm was too smooth. "Julian," the man said, voice mild. "Let's be reasonable. You're under stress. You don't want to damage your own company because of a misunderstanding." Julian turned his head slightly. "A misunderstanding is a missed email," he said. "My lung shutting down is not a misunderstanding." The officer's phone buzzed, and he glanced down, then looked up with a subtle change in his expression. "Hospital toxicology flagged a fast-acting compound consistent with deliberate exposure," he said. "They're forwarding preliminary findings." The boardroom's air changed instantly. Even the liaison flinched, because now this wasn't just a corporate story. It was a criminal one, and criminal stories didn't stay inside glass towers. Harper felt Julian's gaze touch her briefly. Not ownership, not expectation. Something closer to acknowledgement. She'd been right to smell what she smelled. And being right had just moved the entire night onto a different track. Julian looked at the liaison and spoke with brutal calm. "You had a choice," he said. "Tell me someone tampered with my drink,
or tried to make the waitress sign away her life so you could control the story. The liaison's mouth opened, then closed. Celeste, who had slipped into the doorway behind the officers, finally spoke, voice sharper than her perfume. "This is insane," she said. "You're humiliating people over a waitress's guess." Harper turned her head slowly towards Celeste, and the room watched, because it was always easier for them to look at the waitress than the fiancée. "It wasn't a guess," Harper said. "It was observation." Celeste's eyes narrowed.
"You think you're special because you did CPR?" she snapped. Harper didn't raise her voice.
"I think I'm alive because I didn't freeze," she replied. "And I think you're scared because the footage exists." Celeste went still for a fraction, and it was enough. Julian's voice dropped into something almost gentle, which made it worse. "Celeste," he said, "tell me why you tried to move her out of the hospital before I woke up." Celeste's composure cracked, then reformed into anger. "Because she's a liability," she said. "Because she's going to cost you." Julian smiled faintly, and it wasn't warmth, it was clarity. "She already saved me," he said. "So if she costs me, I'll pay it gladly." The liaison pushed back his chair as if motion could create escape. "Julian, listen," he said, fast. "This was never meant to—" Julian raised a hand and Adrian stepped in, placing it calmly on the liaison's shoulder. "You're done," Adrian said. The officers moved in with practiced restraint, and the liaison's outrage finally turned into panic, because power always panicked when it realized it wasn't the one holding the pen. The man by the window tried one last move. He looked at Harper, not Julian, and his voice softened into false kindness. "You don't want this," he said. "You can still take the money and walk away." Harper felt the old fear in her chest, rent, bills, her mother's medication. But she also felt something newer, anger at being treated like a button they could press. She met his eyes and spoke carefully, clearly, so every word would survive the retelling. "I do want this," she said. "I want the truth to stay visible, and I want my family to stop being your leverage." Julian's gaze sharpened with something like respect. He waited until the officers had the liaison moving toward the door. Then he turned back to Harper, and the room quieted again, because now they wanted to see what he'd do with the waitress who had become the pivot point.
"You saved my life," Julian said, and for the first time his voice carried real weight that wasn't strategy. "So here's what happens next. Your mother's care gets covered, your debt gets erased, and if you want to finish what you started, nursing, medicine, whatever you choose, my foundation funds it." Harper's throat tightened, because those words were the difference between drowning slowly and breathing, and she hated how much she wanted to accept them. She swallowed and made herself stand straight. "I'll accept," she said, and Celeste's face twitched with disbelief. But Harper lifted her chin slightly and finished the sentence the way Julian had taught the room to listen. "On terms." Julian's eyes narrowed, not offended, curious. "Name them," he said. Harper didn't rush, because rushing was how you sounded grateful, and gratitude was how people stole your boundaries. "No non-disclosure that hides crimes," she said. "No public story that makes me your charity project. No, I own you because I helped you. And I go back to school because I choose it, not because you want a symbol." Julian watched her for a long beat, and then a faint smile touched his mouth, small and real. "Deal," he said. "And Harper?" "Yes," she replied. "You're not invisible anymore," he said, and the simplicity of it landed harder than any threat. Outside the glass, the skyline kept glowing like nothing had happened, but Harper felt the shift in her own chest. She had walked into a luxury room as disposable staff,
and she was leaving a boardroom as a person whose words had weight. As Adrian guided the last of the chaos out and the penthouse finally exhaled, Julian's gaze met Harper's once more, and the tension between them wasn't romance, not yet, but it was something just as dangerous. Mutual recognition forged under pressure, the kind that didn't evaporate when the lights turned off.
The moral of the night didn't belong to the billionaire or the board. It belonged to the girl in the black uniform, who refused to freeze when a room full of power did, and who learned that the fastest way to change your life wasn't luck. It was refusing to sign your name to a lie. If you want more stories like this, where one decision flips the entire board, tap like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.